Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
A few weeks ago, Britain voted in a new parliament, and although his party failed to win a majority, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was the main winner of that election, performing a lot better than many of his critics and the polls had suggested he would. In this episode of Talk to Al Jazeera, we sit down with the veteran politician, talk about Brexit, the recent Grenfell disaster, as well as the war in Syria and his take on the Gulf crisis. Mr. Corbyn, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start by talking about the current political situation in the UK. The country's had a general election just a few weeks ago, and your party performed much better than many analysts had predicted, to the point where the Conservatives have now had to bring in an obscure party like the Irish Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, in order to form a government. What is the next move for you as leader of the opposition?
I think the point you put at the beginning of your question is the important one. The commentators got it wrong. They didn't understand the feelings of people all over the country of anger about austerity and cuts to public expenditure, cuts to services and frozen wages in the public sector. And they didn't understand the frustrations of millions of young people who see a life ahead of them of debt because they want to go to university, of housing difficulties because they can't afford to get anywhere to live, and of insecurity in work with low wages and often insecure jobs. And so it was that frustration that bubbled up. And since the election,
we saw that frustration manifest itself in a specific way, usually in other countries where people have gone either to the right or gone towards populist politics. So whether it's been in the US through Trump or in mainland Europe towards some right-wing parties. The opposite has happened here in the UK. What are you going to do with that frustration now? Are you just going to rest on your laurels and try and consolidate support, or are you going to look to actually continue with this program?
We're not resting on laurels at all, because we didn't actually win the election. We put on more votes than the Labour Party's put on at any election at any time since the Second World War. We gained seats in the election and we came very close to winning it altogether, but we didn't win it altogether. We now are the second largest party in Parliament and we're in a very strong position. So we're challenging the government very, very hard. We challenged them yesterday on the issue of public sector wages and pay, which have been frozen for 7 years, and we challenged them today with our proposal that Britain needs to invest in the future and have a strong economy that shares wealth, and this does mean raising taxation for the very wealthiest in our society. We challenge them on this, and we're taking our campaign out around the country. I'm starting this weekend with the beginnings of a visit to every one of the 73 constituencies we need to win in order to form a Labour government. We don't know how long this government could last, but as you pointed out, they've done a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party. They've offered them very large sums of money for some capital investment in Northern Ireland, but it's unfair. It's not reasonable when compared to what is invested in English regions or in Scotland or Wales, and so we'll be exposing that. This is a time of incredible political flux and growth. Party membership, Labour Party membership, has gone up from 200,000 at the time of the last general election in 2015 to now, for this general election, almost 600,000. We're moving towards 600,000 members. Massive increase, big increase in support, but we've not stopped there. Thousands more have joined the party since the election, and there appears to be a growth in support for us. And so we are out there campaigning. We're putting all the pressure on the campaign.
Are you campaigning on policies and to legislate, or is part of your campaign a focus to bring down this government before the next election? Do you see that this is your opportunity now to actually ensure that there is a Labour government prior to the next 4 or 5 years when the next election is scheduled?
The two things go together. We're campaigning on policies which are about social justice in Britain, are about investment economy, and exposing what has been happening for the past 7 years. We've had 40% cut, for example, in local councils' expenditure. That means closed libraries, closed swimming pools. It means in schools, oversized classes. It means a lack of public administration. And the awful events that happened very recently when a tower block in London, a block of flats, caught fire. Over 80 people are already recorded as being killed in that, but we know there are many more bodies that have still not been identified.
Well, on the Grenfell fire, you made the point that the cut in public spending, there is a link between it and the fire. Your opponents claim that that was a cheap shot to score political points. What's your response to that?
I think we've got to wake up in the whole country on this. That was an overcrowded block which had dangerous cladding to it. The outside cladding was flammable and led to the awful events that happened there. And we've now discovered that there are over 100 tower blocks around the country that have already been identified as clad in the same material. So what happened to building control inspection? What happened to fire inspections? What happened to planning controls that this was allowed to happen, not just in Grenfell Tower, but in all the others? And the point I simply made to the Prime Minister was there is a connection. If public services don't operate and you cut expenditure by 40%, there is a connection between them. So what we're saying is they've got to end austerity and start to invest in the future.
One of the moving videos that came out of the Grenfell disaster was a video message from one of the survivors who she pointed out that in the same borough where the tower exists, there is the Kensington Palace. And she questioned that whether if that fire taken place inside the palace, would the response have been the same, or would more have been done in order to save that building? What do you make of that?
That's the interesting thing about London. You get areas of poverty alongside areas of great riches. I absolutely support the work the emergency services did. The firefighters who rushed in knowing there was danger, the ambulance workers who did the same, the police who did the same. I think they made every possible effort they could to save life. The problem was the fire had taken hold. They were there very quickly. I'm not making any criticism of the emergency services and the work they did. I do criticise the government for cutting the funding for emergency services.
Okay, let's move to another challenge or hot topic here in the United Kingdom, and that's about Brexit and the process of exiting the European Union. You have something in common with the government policy in that you both agree that you should leave the single market. Is that out of ideological conviction that you actually believe that now, Britain should exit the EU at all costs, or what's the wisdom behind that?
A year ago there was a referendum, and that referendum came to a decision that we should leave the European Union, and I think one has to respect that decision. We're very clear of a number of things. One, we're leaving the European Union. Two, we want the closest possible trade relations with Europe in the future, a tariff-free access to the European market. That isn't necessarily the same thing as the single market, which has various rules around it. It's a tariff-free access to the market. That is very important. Thirdly, that we guarantee the rights of European Union nationals living in Britain to remain here, and the rights of their families to join them should they wish to do so here. So their position will be secure. And we ask the European countries to do the same for British nationals, but not on a reciprocal basis. We would do it unilaterally. That's the Labour view. We are very clear that we would maintain membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, and therefore the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights on human rights law.
Referendum happened, but people change their minds. They're not set in stone in the sense that you can also offer a referendum again, because circumstances change. Why don't you offer a second referendum on the EU?
We think Parliament should make that decision on the basis that have been set out, that there will be a good trade relationship with Europe in the future.
Okay, let's move to another issue and talk about the spate of attacks that have taken place in the United Kingdom over the past year or so, from Westminster to Manchester to the more recent attack on Muslim worshippers in Finsbury Park, your own constituency. How do you think the UK should be tackling the problem of terrorism?
I think immediately you have to deal with it on a security basis. That is ensuring that you're aware of any dangers that are going on and you try to prevent them if there's an attack imminently, and you have an effective police and security service to deal with that. The response by the security services and the police in the immediate aftermath of the attacks was again very good, but they're very stretched. There's been 10,000 police officers lost their jobs. But there is the wider context of it, and that is the government has pursued a policy called Prevent, which is the idea being to prevent radicalisation of young Muslims in Britain. We believe that policy should be changed. There should be a counter-extremism policy which should deal with far-right racism and any other form of irrational extremism that happens within our society. But there also has to be a recognition that the connection with Libya of some of the most radical people, which has huge ungoverned spaces, has to be addressed. And in the aftermath of Manchester, I was impressed with the way the people of Manchester came together in Albert Square outside the town hall, all people of all communities, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu.
You mentioned Libya, and I'm going to come back to Libya because actually one of the UK's closest allies has constantly been breaking a UN arms embargo on Libya. But before we get to that point, I'm not just talking about the reaction to these attacks. In fact, I'm talking about preventing them, obviously not through the program. I mean, many studies have shown that
preventing attacks is very important.
Well, this is the thing. So obviously you speak about the security services, but there are a lot of studies that show a direct link between Britain's foreign policy and the attacks that have taken place across the UK. In fact, you yourself have spoken about that. Yet, as you mentioned, the UK government continues to put more resources into programs that focus on surveillance and spying on minority communities in the UK. What's your take on this? Why has nobody learned the lesson in the UK since prior to even Theresa May's government? In fact, Prevent, if I'm not mistaken, started in a Labour government under Tony Blair. Why is it taken so long for people to realise this? And what policy are you pushing as an alternative to this?
In the aftermath of the Manchester attack, we had a pause in general election campaigning. And on the day that we restarted campaigning, I gave a, I hope would we agree, thoughtful speech about the issue, about the way in which communities unite in the face of adversity, and the way we will not allow our democracy to be destroyed by those who commit acts of terror. None of those acts of terror are done in the name of Islam, as I understand it, any more than attacks such as Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma were done in the name of Christianity. They are acts of terror that will seek to kill and divide people. They are wrong, absolutely wrong. I drew the connection with foreign policy. I drew the connection with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, with indeed what happened in Afghanistan in 2001, and of course later on the bombing of Libya. And indeed, when I spoke in the huge rally in Hyde Park in London in 2003, I said this war, if it goes ahead, will leave behind a legacy of bitterness and civil strife and terrorism in the future. And sadly, that is in part what has happened. And so whilst one has to say any terror attack is fundamentally the responsibility of the persons that commit that attack, you have to, I think, start learning the lessons from it. I think a lot of people have learned those lessons.
Well, as you mentioned, you've got a long track record of anti-war activism, both as an activist and a politician. What's your stance on the ongoing war in Yemen, a war that's being led by one of the UK's closest allies, Saudi Arabia?
I'm totally shocked by the war in Yemen, totally shocked by the bombardment that's taken place, by the killings that have happened, by the cholera outbreak that's now rife, and the numbers who are affected, the numbers who've already died. And of course the numbers of people living in desperate poverty or indeed in starvation. Now think about it, cholera is a wholly and totally and completely preventable disease. It comes from dirty water, it comes from pollution, it comes from the breakdown of the normal civilian infrastructure that we all enjoy in the cities and towns where we live. And so we have constantly condemned the use of these weapons by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and called for the suspension of the arms sales to Saudi Arabia to show that we are wanting a peace process in Yemen, not an invasion by Saudi Arabia. We've made that very clear. Emily Thornberry, our Shadow Foreign Secretary, has spoken on this frequently in Parliament and indeed moved a resolution on it in Parliament.
So there will be a Labour-led resolution in Parliament demanding that the UK government suspends arms sales
to
Saudi Arabia?
We've already put that resolution to Parliament. In the last Parliament, and we'll continue to do. There's a new Parliament formed after this general election. Our policy from the Labour Party is unchanged.
Will this also include another Gulf country, actually, which is the United Arab Emirates? Because there has been reports by Human Rights Watch, as well as media reports in the Associated Press, of secret prisons that have been set up in Yemen by the UAE, in which these secret prisons, widespread torture has happened, to cases that have been documented of people being roasted alive on a spit, essentially burnt as part of the torture there. Yet the UAE also is one of the UK's closest allies. The UAE enjoys a lot of commercial allies here. And in fact, when it comes to foreign policy, there's been reports or instances where Britain's foreign policy to the Middle East has actually been directly influenced by the United Arab Emirates.
There has to be a ceasefire in Yemen. There has to be independent, verifiable United Nations inspections, and crimes, including war crimes that have been committed, must be investigated and must be dealt with for what they are. All of those allegations have to be investigated and the evidence has to come forward. And our arms sales policy has to reflect that we do not believe those countries that commit abuses of human rights or kill civilians with the use of those weapons should continue to receive British arms.
Staying with the Gulf, and I want to ask you about the crisis with Qatar. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have been laying siege to Qatar now for more than 3 weeks. They've issued a list of demands that they say Doha must meet. And amongst those demands is the shutting down not only of Al Jazeera, but also of several other media outlets. Why have you not come out and condemned this attempt at curbing free speech and press freedoms in the Gulf?
Well, I've always condemned curtailing of free speech, and I've always supported press freedoms. Indeed, I've always supported Al Jazeera's right to be able to broadcast. And indeed, I spent a lot of time supporting your colleagues, some of whom are still in prison in Egypt. And the demand that Al Jazeera be shut down is obviously completely wrong. And indeed, Sigmar Gabriel, the foreign minister in Germany, has made it very clear that the demands being placed on Qatar are completely unreasonable. There has to be an end to any kind of siege.
How do you view Britain being best placed to bring about a political solution to this, considering the close ties that the UK has with all the different Gulf countries?
Britain obviously has very close ties, in some cases as being a former colonial power, and obviously a major trading partner with many countries in the region, and obviously has a diplomatic presence all over the region. I've made my points about interventions in Iraq. I've made my points about interventions in Libya. I've also continued to make the points about arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And indeed, when the situation in Bahrain has become acute, I've often spoken out on that as well. Indeed, I've spoken about Bahrain at the UN Human Rights Council and a number of seminars that have been held there. And so, yes, I want a Labour government in Britain. There may well be one as soon as we get a general election. And that Labour government's cornerstone of its foreign policy will be promotion of human rights and democracy.
All right, let's move on to another major crisis in the Middle East, and it's the war in Syria. You voted against UK military action there, and you were against intervention to move, or direct intervention to remove Bashar al-Assad, a person who's responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of civilians there and displacing millions. That war is still ongoing. It's almost 7 years now. What's your solution to the war there?
The war is appalling. The thousands and tens of thousands that continue to suffer and die because of that war must get some relief. The only way forward has to be a ceasefire that involves Russia, involves America, involves the European Union, involves the neighbouring states, and involves the Syrian regime. There has to be a reconvening of Geneva III, and there has to be a settlement that recognises the diversity of Syria and allows the refugees to return home. We cannot go on just accepting that arms will pour into the region and more bombing will take place, knowing full well that many of those people that die are actually civilians completely uninvolved with the fighting. I opposed British intervention in Syria, because I believe that we should move towards a diplomatic solution, that we should move towards reconvening the Geneva talks, Geneva 3. Now is the time to do that urgently, to obtain a new ceasefire. I believe it is possible in order to bring about some longer term solution. I don't support any of the sides in the conflict. I don't support the Assad regime. I do condemn its human rights abuses, as I condemn the human rights abuses of all others. The only way forward has to be Geneva 3 and a political solution.
What about the international fight against ISIS or Daesh? There is obviously a specific trajectory to how things have happened in Iraq. These groups didn't exist prior to the illegal invasion or occupation of Iraq. They now exist. And as a result of this war on ISIL, whether intentionally or unintentionally, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of refugees as well, both internally displaced and Iran. What is the solution to Iraq, essentially? I mean, a country it's been ravaged constantly. If it's not been by sanctions, it's been by war for over 2 decades now.
It's had sanctions, then it's had war, and it continues to have war and conflict, and continues to have desperate poverty in parts of Iraq because of those wars. And ISIS has grown because it's had money, because it's had arms, because it's had space. The arms didn't come from nowhere, the money didn't come from nowhere, the sales of oils don't go nowhere. There's a lot of people that are complicit in the growth of ISIS, and so I would have a very, very strong policy of total isolation of ISIS at the same time as promoting a political settlement in Syria. That seems to me to be the key to the future. Finally,
I want to bring it back home and ask you about Jeremy Corbyn, the man. You have developed a bit of a personality cult here. You are definitely one of the more popular people in Britain these days. We saw the huge crowds at Glastonbury cheer you on, the "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" chants that have become as famous as some of the football chants in the UK. But people still remember you as the anti-war activist who would show up on his bike or would be in the middle of pickets in central London, just him and a few of his comrades. How has this huge transformation, the success that you've witnessed, how has that changed you as a person?
Well, I was on my bike this morning. I love cycling and I love talking to people in the area that I represent, and continue to do so and always will, because the only way you can ever lead is by listening to people who are going through stress and strains in their ordinary lives and supporting them and learning from them. Leadership isn't always about telling people what to do and what to think. It's understanding what's going on in their lives. I've spent my life in political activity, for peace, for justice, for human rights, and I continue to do that. I contested the leadership of the Labour Party in 2015 because I was unhappy with what the Labour Party was offering. I thought we were offering a continuation of an economic system that clearly doesn't work, that has failed and has created grotesque levels of inequality in this country. And surprisingly, we won the leadership, surprisingly to many, but maybe not so surprising, because a lot of people in the Labour Party wanted something different. And so what we're doing is working with people for an exciting future. Listen, the next generation doesn't have to be poorer than this one. People don't have to live in poverty. We live in a world of great riches, and we live in a world of great opportunities. Let's harness them.
I understand that, and I do appreciate that, and I know millions of people do, and that's why they voted for you. But what I want to know is that couple of minutes before you go to sleep, or the couple of minutes when you wake up and you're brushing your teeth and looking in the mirror, is there ever that time where you think, I really never saw myself here?
Well, I never started out in life to become a politician. It kind of happened. I got involved in peace activities, I got involved in local community activities, I was involved as a trade unionist and trade union organiser, and I then was elected to a local council in the 1970s, and then later on I was asked to become a Labour candidate for Parliament and was elected for the area, the same area I still represent, in 1983. And I don't think you should ever be so high and mighty you can't listen to what people are telling you. You should never get too far away from the people that put you there in the first place.
Mr. Corbyn, there's an Arabic proverb that says the best leaders are those who serve their people. Thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you. Enjoyed being here.